Welcome to this channel. At the sum of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories for you. Subscribe. The Galactic tournament had always been more than just a series of brutal contests. It was the beating heart of the cosmos' obsession with power. Every 5 years, the galaxy's fiercest competitors gathered on the neutral, floating city of Cinder Prime, a planet-sized coliseum in the middle of the Havilon Nebula. The tournament was a test of physical strength, strategic brilliance, and willpower that transcended species and technology. The victors earned not only glory but influence, resources, and the right to shape the future of their people. Captain Adrian Kane stood on the observation deck, gazing out over the sprawling, holographic displays that filled the vast preparation chamber. Dozens of alien competitors filled the space below, each a champion of their species, readying themselves for the first round. Some sharpened weapons made from exotic materials, others practiced manipulating the elements with sheer force of will. There was an unmistakable tension in the air. Kane, however, was not like the others. A human war veteran who had once led soldiers in the Terran Wars, he had no need for validation. His face, hardened by years of combat, bore the scars of a decade-long struggle that had pushed Earth and its allies to the brink. A streak of silver lined his otherwise dark hair, and his left arm was a state-of-the-art mechanical prosthetic, a relic of a battle long since past. He had come to the tournament not for glory, but for closure. After the wars, Kane had been adrift, searching for a purpose that had eluded him ever since the final peace accords were signed. The tournament, with its dangerous allure and constant test of survival, seemed like a place where a man like him could find something, if not redemption, then at least a final challenge to prove to himself that he still had a place in the universe. As the competitors shuffled into the designated arena zones, Kane noticed something strange. Amid the towering warriors and bioengineered predators, a lone figure sat quietly in the far corner of the room, unnoticed by the others. A young boy, small and fragile-looking compared to the muscular and fearsome beings around him. His skin was a deep green, almost reptilian, with dark veins of red running beneath the surface. He was seated in a hover chair, one arm missing, and his legs replaced with crude mechanical prosthetics. The boy's head was down, staring at the floor, his small, sharp claws gripping the edges of the chair nervously. Kane squinted. The boy was clearly a Catraxi, a species known for their brutal strength and impressive regenerative abilities. They were a warrior race, feared across the stars. But this boy, he was a shadow of what a Catraxi should be. His condition was a stark contrast to the hulking, armored giants Kane had faced in the past. The sight tugged at something deep in Kane's chest. He had seen that look before, on countless battlefield gym soldiers, out of their depth, thrown into wars they didn't understand. The ones who were used and discarded by the powers that controlled their fates. Kane crossed the room, moving past several warriors who glanced at him with curiosity. As he approached the boy, he noticed the crowd gave the child a wide berth. None of the other competitors spoke to him, and no one made an effort to engage with him. Kane knelt beside the hover chair, lowering himself to the boy's eye level. "What's your name, kid?" Kane asked, his voice gruff but softened by curiosity. The boy flinched, startled by the sudden approach. His amber eyes flickered up, wide with surprise. For a moment, it seemed as if he might not answer. Then, in a voice so quiet Kane had to strain to hear, he whispered, "Varian." "Varian, huh?" Kane looked him over, noting the missing limb, the mismatched prosthetics. "You here to fight?" Varian hesitated, his eyes darting to the competitors around them. I don't know. My clan dash," he broke off, lowering his gaze to the floor. "They put me in this. I don't want to be here." Kane frowned. He had seen this before, children thrown into battles they weren't ready for, used as pawns in the games of those more powerful. The Catraxi were a proud race, obsessed with strength and victory. For them to send a boy like Varian into the tournament meant one thing: they didn't expect him to survive. "They think I'm weak," Varian murmured. I'm not like the others. Kane's heart tightened at the words. There was a time when he, too, had been cast aside, judged unworthy after he'd lost his arm in battle. Only through sheer determination had he fought his way back, proving that he was more than his injuries. He saw something of himself in the boy, that same flicker of defiance mixed with hopelessness. "Let me guess," Kane said. "They sent you here to fail, didn't they?" Varian nodded, his thin frame trembling slightly. "They want me to die. I'm not fit to be Catraxi. But I want to live. I want to show them they're wrong." Kane leaned back, folding his arms. He studied the boy closely, weighing his next words carefully. This wasn't his fight, and he knew he had no obligation to get involved. Yet something about Varian's situation stirred him. Maybe it was the echo of his own past, or maybe it was just the sense that no one should be thrown away so easily, especially not a child. "Listen, kid," Kane said, his voice steady. "You don't have to prove anything to them. I've been around long enough to know that strength isn't just about muscle or power. It's about surviving when everything around you says you shouldn't." Varian looked up at him, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. "But I don't know how. I can't fight like they do." Kane gave him a small, reassuring nod. "You don't need to fight like them. You fight like you." The boy blinked, uncertain but curious. Kane rose to his feet and looked out over the other competitors, the ones who ignored Varian, the ones who had already written him off. "I'll tell you what," Kane said, his voice low. "Stick with me. I'll show you a few things, and we'll see what happens. You've got more in you than they think." Varian stared at him, disbelief warring with a growing sense of determination. For the first time since entering the tournament, he felt like he wasn't completely alone. Kane turned and gestured for the boy to follow. "Come on, kid. Let's show this galaxy what you're really made of." As the boy hovered after him, a quiet resolve settled into place. Kane didn't know where this road would lead, but one thing was clear: this tournament was no longer just about his own search for closure. It was about giving someone else a chance to defy the fate they'd been handed. The tournament was about to change. And so were they. The air in the tournament's preparation zone buzzed with tension as the first round neared. Combatants from countless worlds were gearing up, fine-tuning weapons and checking tactical data. Every species had sent their best, from towering beasts covered in armor to beings of pure energy, shimmering in and out of visible reality. Amid the chaos, Kane kept his eyes on Varian, who still sat quietly in his hover chair, his small frame dwarfed by the towering competitors around them. Kane had promised to help the boy, but he knew this tournament wouldn't allow for half measures. Varian wasn't just outmatched physically, the Catraxi's own culture had set him up to fail. And yet, there was something about the kid that made Kane believe he wasn't as helpless as he appeared. He had seen enough wars to recognize someone with the will to survive. As Kane approached Varian, the boy was nervously adjusting a control panel on his hover chair, his clawed hand shaking as he tried to recalibrate the clunky, outdated technology. Kane crouched beside him, inspecting the chair's interface. "That thing's seen better days," Kane said, running a hand along the worn metal frame. Varian's large amber eyes flicked up to meet Kane's. "It's all I have," he muttered, voice low. I don't need much. Just enough to move." Kane's eyes narrowed, sensing something deeper in the boy's tone. "Why do they want you to fail so badly? Why send you here at all?" Varian hesitated, his sharp claws tapping against the metal of his chair. "I'm different," he whispered. "In my clan, strength is everything. The weak are cast out. I was born smaller than the others, weaker. My legs, they never worked right." He glanced down at his mechanical prosthetics, a flicker of anger in his expression. "They say I'm a disgrace." Kane's jaw tightened. He had seen this kind of cruelty before, societies that judged worth only by physical power, discarding those who didn't fit their mold. But why the tournament? He pressed. Why throw you into something like this if they think you're weak? They're testing me, Varian said quietly, his voice strained. If I survive, it means I'm worthy to stay in the clan. But they don't think I will. They want to get rid of me without having to face the shame of exiling me. Kane leaned back, a slow anger building in his chest. The Catraxi clan wasn't just abandoning the boy, they were using him, sending him to his death as a way to cleanse themselves of what they saw as weakness. Well, you're here now, Kane said, his voice low but firm. You made it this far, and that's something. But this tournament, these competitors, they'll tear you apart if you try to face them head-on. Varian nodded, his eyes downcast. I know. But I don't have a choice. Kane stood, scanning the room full of towering aliens and cybernetic warriors. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to this boy in the first place, but now that he understood the depth of Varian's situation, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Varian's story mirrored so many soldiers Kane had known in the past, cast aside, underestimated, and abandoned to fend for themselves in a brutal world. You always have a choice, kid, Kane said, crossing his arms. And you don't have to face this alone. I've seen a lot of fights in my time, and it's not always the strongest who survive. Sometimes it's the smartest. And sometimes it's the ones who know how to adapt. Varian blinked up at him, confusion flickering across his face. What do you mean? Kane gave him a small, almost grim smile. I mean, we're going to use your mind, not just your body. These guys? He gestured to the hulking aliens who towered over them, prepping for battle with oversized weapons and brute force. They're all muscle and no brains. They've got strength, sure, but they lack strategy. If you're going to win or even survive, you're going to have to think 2 steps ahead. Varian stared at Kane, a mix of skepticism and hope flickering in his eyes. But I don't know how to fight like them. That's the point, Kane said. You don't have to fight like them. You're going to fight smarter. And I'm going to help you figure out how. As the first round was about to begin, a booming voice echoed throughout the chamber. A holographic figure materialized in the center of the room, its face a shifting mask of different alien features. This was the tournament's overseer, a sentient AI known as the Arbiter, tasked with ensuring the rules of the competition were followed. Competitors, prepare for round 1. You will enter the Shifting Sands arena. The objective, survival. The competitors around them immediately began gathering their weapons, adjusting their armor, and powering up their various enhancements. Kane and Varian, however, stood apart from the frenzy. Shifting Sands arena, Kane muttered, rubbing his chin. That's a terrain-based challenge. The environment will change constantly, unstable ground, sudden sandstorms, gravity fluctuations. It's going to be chaotic. Varian swallowed nervously. I'm not fast enough to keep up with that. My chair can't move that quickly. Doesn't matter, Kane replied. Speed isn't what's going to save you. You need to think strategically. Let the others wear themselves out fighting the environment. You focus on staying out of sight and moving when it's safe. And always keep an eye on your surroundings. Varian nodded, though Kane could see the boy was still uncertain. And what about you? Varian asked, looking up at him. Kane grinned, flexing his mechanical arm. Don't worry about me, kid. I've been through worse. Besides, I'm not here to win. I'm here to make sure you get through this. The doors to the arena opened with a loud hiss, revealing the shifting landscape of sand dunes and twisted metal structures that seemed to rise and fall with the rhythm of the wind. The harsh sunlight glinted off the distant horizon, and the air crackled with the energy of the artificial gravity fields that would soon destabilize the arena. Kane stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the soft sand. He glanced back at Varian, who hesitated before guiding his hoverchair forward, the soft hum of the anti-grav engine barely audible over the distant howl of wind. Remember what I said, Kane called over his shoulder. Stick close to cover. Don't engage unless you have to. And trust your instincts. Varian nodded, his small face set with determination. The competitors surged into the arena, weapons drawn and abilities activated. Beams of energy shot across the sands, and creatures with bio-enhanced limbs tore through the dunes in search of their prey. But Kane and Varian moved differently, slower, more deliberate, staying close to the crumbling structures that lined the edge of the arena. As the first skirmishes broke out in the distance, Kane kept his eyes scanning the environment. He could feel the sand shifting beneath his feet, the artificial gravity beginning to fluctuate. The ground would destabilize soon, and anyone caught in the open would be in trouble. Varian's hoverchair floated close behind him, the boy's eyes darting nervously between the approaching dangers. "I don't think I can do this," Varian said quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind. Kane turned to face him, his expression calm but firm. "You can. Trust me. This is just the beginning. We stick to the plan, and we'll make it through this." Before Varian could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, and a massive fissure opened up just a few meters away, swallowing several combatants whole. The tournament had begun in earnest, and survival was now the only goal. Kane glanced back at Varian, who gripped the edges of his chair tightly, his amber eyes wide with fear, but also something else, determination. "Let's move," Kane said, his voice steady. "And remember, we're not here to win this round. We're here to survive." As they navigated the unstable arena, Kane couldn't help but wonder just how far this unlikely partnership would take them. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let the galaxy, or the boys' clan, decide Varian's fate. Not without a fight. Together, they plunged into the chaos of the tournament, with more than just survival on the line. The ground trembled beneath their feet as Kane and Varian navigated the treacherous landscape of the shifting sands arena. Sandstorms whipped across the arena, concealing towering structures and ancient ruins that rose from the dunes. The artificial gravity fields flickered and warped, making even the smallest movement unpredictable. Combatants, scattered across the arena, clashed in brutal skirmishes, their weapons glowing with alien energy and technology far beyond what Kane had seen in his years of combat. But Kane wasn't here for a frontal assault. He had a different goal: survival. Kane kept close to Varian, his sharp military instincts guiding them through the chaos. As they moved between cover-crumbling walls of ancient buildings and massive rusted metal plates embedded in the sand, Kane could feel Varian's nervous energy. The boy was terrified, his thin fingers gripping the edges of his hoverchair, the soft hum of the anti-gravity engine barely audible over the howl of the wind. "Keep your head down," Kane instructed as they approached a dilapidated pillar. "This isn't about taking out the competition. We're going to outlast them." Varian nodded, though his wide amber eyes were filled with doubt. "But how long can we do that? They'll come for us eventually." Kane crouched beside him, peering out from their temporary shelter at the fierce fighting in the distance. "That's the thing, kid. We're going to make sure they don't." The next few hours were grueling. The gravity distortions sent entire sections of the arena collapsing in on themselves, creating shifting mazes of debris that forced the competitors to constantly adjust their tactics. Massive beasts, native to far-off worlds, had been released into the arena, their bioengineered forms towering over the combatants. The sounds of alien roars and the clash of energy weapons echoed across the shifting dunes. Kane and Varian remained in the background, moving from cover to cover, watching as stronger competitors, those relying on brute force or sheer speed, fell victim to the unforgiving environment. Varian, while struggling to keep his hoverchair steady in the fluctuating gravity, had begun to observe the patterns of the arena. His sharp eyes took in the shifting terrain, and he noticed things that Kane didn't: the way certain sections of the ground stayed stable for just a moment longer, the split-second warning signs before a sandstorm hit. "Kane, over there," Varian said, pointing toward a distant rise in the sand. "That structure, it hasn't moved in a while. We could use it as cover, and it'll give us a higher vantage point." Kane followed Varian's gaze. The boy was right. A twisted spire of metal, possibly remnants of an ancient starship or long-forgotten tech, jutted out from the sand like a forgotten sentinel. It was stable enough, for now, and would give them a better view of the arena's layout. "Good eye," Kane said with a nod. "Let's move." They pushed forward, navigating the erratic terrain, avoiding stray energy blasts and the occasional combatant that got too close. More than once, Kane had to fend off a competitor with a quick strike or a well-placed shot from his pulse pistol, but they avoided any serious engagements. Varian stayed close, his hoverchair humming as it hovered just above the shifting sands, his face a mask of concentration. As they reached the spire, the view it offered was both breathtaking and terrifying. The arena stretched out for miles, a chaotic battlefield of sand, debris, and shattered structures. In the distance, they could see pockets of combat still raging, massive alien beasts locked in battle with heavily armed warriors. "We've lasted longer than most of them," Kane muttered, his eyes scanning the landscape. Varian, hovering beside him, looked uncertain. "But it's not over yet. And we're still outnumbered." Kane chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "It's never been about numbers, kid. It's about endurance. You've got something these guys don't." Varian frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Kane turned to him, his expression serious. "They all rely on their strength, their weapons, their power. But you're different. You've survived being cast out by your own people. You're here, despite them wanting you gone. That takes willpower. And in a fight like this, that's what's going to keep you alive." Varian stared at Kane, something shifting in his gaze. It was as if, for the first time, he began to see the possibility that he wasn't as helpless as he thought. Before he could respond, a loud crash shook the ground beneath them. Kane spun around just in time to see a massive Dragare towering, four-armed beast covered in nearly impenetrable armor charging toward them. The creature's eyes glowed a deep red, and its tusks were stained with the blood of those it had already defeated. Kane cursed under his breath. "Stay behind me," he barked, pulling his pulse pistol from its holster. He fired several shots at the Dragar, but the blasts merely bounced off the creature's armor, leaving it unharmed. Varian's hoverchair backed up slightly, his face pale with fear. "We can't fight that thing." Kane gritted his teeth, firing again as the Dragar advanced. "We don't have to beat it. We just need to outsmart it." He glanced at Varian, his mind racing. The boy had been right before he had a sharp eye for the battlefield. "You see any weaknesses on that thing?" Kane asked, ducking behind a piece of metal to avoid the creature's massive fist as it smashed into the ground. Varian's eyes darted over the Dragar, his mind racing. "It's back," he said suddenly. "There's a gap between the armor plates. It's small, but if you can hit it there." Kane nodded. "Good. Now we just need to distract it." The Dragar roared, its massive frame charging forward again. Kane stood his ground, waiting for the right moment. As the beast lunged at him, Kane dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. He rolled across the sand, coming up with his pulse pistol aimed squarely at the exposed gap in the Dragar's back. He fired, and the shot hit its mark. The Dragar let out a guttural roar of pain as the pulse blast struck the weak point in its armor. It staggered, momentarily disoriented, giving Kane the opening he needed. He rushed forward, launching a well-aimed strike with his mechanical arm, sending the beast crashing to the ground. Panting, Kane turned to Varian, who watched in stunned silence. "You see that?" Kane said, his voice breathless. "That's how you survive." Varian blinked, his fear slowly giving way to awe. We did it." Kane nodded, his expression softening. "We did. But this was just one fight. There's going to be more." Varian glanced at the downed Dragar, his amber eyes filled with a newfound sense of determination. "I understand now. It's not just about fighting. It's about knowing when and how to strike." Kane gave him a small smile. Exactly. And you've got a talent for that, kid. As they continued through the arena, it became clear that Varian's sharp mind was their greatest asset. With each passing hour, he grew more confident, using his observational skills to guide them through dangerous situations. While the other competitors fought with brute force, Kane and Varian moved with precision, avoiding unnecessary fights and exploiting the environment to their advantage. Varian began to see the battlefield not as a place of overwhelming danger, but as a complex puzzle he was beginning to understand. He guided Kane through the shifting terrain, spotting ambushes before they could happen and predicting where the arena's gravity would shift next. Together, they formed an unlikely but effective team. Kane, for his part, felt a sense of pride in the boy. Varian wasn't just surviving, he was thriving in a way that no one, especially his own clan, had expected. As the sun began to set over the chaotic arena, casting long shadows across the shifting sands, Kane and Varian found themselves standing at the edge of a temporary calm. The distant sounds of battle were fading, and the number of competitors left was rapidly dwindling. But Kane knew the real challenges were still ahead. The tournament would only grow more dangerous from here, and their enemies would soon realize that the human veteran and the disabled Catraxi boy were more than just survivors. They were contenders. And in a galaxy that valued strength above all else, they were about to prove that survival wasn't just about muscle and power, it was about outlasting those who thought they were invincible. The tournament had reached its climactic stage. Only two teams remained in the final round, Kane and Varian, the unlikely pair who had defied the odds with their cunning and survival instincts, and the Xantharian Z group of cold, calculating warriors from a highly advanced species known for their combat prowess and telepathic coordination. They were the favorites to win, undefeated in over a century of tournaments. Ruthless and efficient, they were everything Kane and Varian weren't. But Kane had never put stock in what people expected. The final arena was unlike anything Kane had seen before. The environment shifted continuously, as though the laws of physics themselves were being toyed with. Floating platforms, some no larger than a hoverbike, drifted lazily in a sky devoid of a sun, yet still eerily illuminated. Huge, jagged rocks, each the size of a small building, hung suspended in midair, rotating slowly like broken pieces of a shattered moon. Gravity flickered between heavy and light in random intervals, sending combatants and debris floating, only to slam back down moments later. This was a battleground designed not just to challenge strength, but to break the mind. Varian hovered beside Kane, his face tense with concentration. His eyes darted across the chaotic landscape, analyzing every floating boulder, every flashing energy field, every unpredictable shift in the environment. The hum of his hoverchair was the only constant in the surreal, ever-changing battlefield. Kane could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His mechanical arm hummed as he flexed it, preparing for what he knew would be the hardest fight of his life. He glanced at Varian, who seemed lost in thought, his amber eyes glowing faintly as he processed the situation. "Stay sharp, kid," Kane said quietly. "These Xantharians aren't like the others. They're smart. They'll try to get inside your head." Varian nodded, though his jaw was clenched. "I've read about them. Their telepathic abilities let them coordinate perfectly. They'll know our moves before we make them." Kane grunted in acknowledgement. The Xantharians had been undefeated for a reason. Their greatest strength wasn't just their combat skills, it was their ability to think and act as one, a hive mind that gave them an almost unfair advantage. But Kane had a plan. He always did. As they stepped onto the starting platform, the crowd, an eclectic mix of species and creatures from across the galaxy, roared in anticipation. Holographic screens flickered above, displaying the two teams to the audience, and Kane's eyes lingered on the image of the Xantharians, three tall, sleek figures with pale, translucent skin and glowing eyes, their bodies covered in armor that shimmered with every color of the spectrum. They stood perfectly still, their expressions serene, as if the chaotic battlefield around them didn't matter. "They're not invincible," Kane muttered, more to himself than to Varian. The final round began with the deafening blare of the tournament's ceremonial horns, and immediately the battlefield became a whirl of motion. The Xantharians moved as one, their forms blurring as they glided effortlessly between floating platforms, their weapons pulsing with ethereal energy. Kane fired the first shot, a blast from his pulse pistol that cracked through the air toward one of the Xantharians. But as he expected, they dodged with inhuman speed, the energy beam dissipating harmlessly into the void. Before Kane could fire again, they retaliated. One of the Xantharians raised a hand, and an invisible wave of telekinetic force slammed into Kane, sending him sprawling backward into the air. The gravity shifted at that exact moment, and Kane found himself floating uncontrollably, tumbling through the air toward a jagged rock formation. He braced for impact, twisting his body to avoid a direct hit, and landed hard against the rock, the breath knocked from his lungs. "Focus, Kane." Varian's voice echoed in his ear. Kane grunted as he pushed himself up. He could see Varian hovering nearby, his eyes glowing as he concentrated on the battlefield. Unlike the other competitors, Varian wasn't built for direct combat, but his mind was his greatest weapon. Kane had learned to trust that. "We can't beat them head-on," Varian called, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But the environment, they can't control it. They're relying on their coordination, but if we disrupt the battlefield, we can break their focus." Kane nodded, catching his breath as he assessed the situation. The Xantharians moved in perfect harmony, their attacks synchronized, but they weren't paying attention to the shifting arena as much as they should have been. Varian was right, they were so confident in their telepathic advantage that they weren't adapting to the constant changes in the environment. "You've got an idea?" Kane asked, his eyes narrowing as he formulated a plan. Varian's hoverchair hummed as he floated closer. "The gravity wells. They're unstable, but I've noticed a pattern. If we can lure them into the wrong spot when the gravity shifts, we can disorient them." Kane's lips curled into a grin. "You're smarter than I thought, kid." They moved quickly. Kane fired off several more shots, not aiming to hit but to draw the Xantharians' attention. They dodged effortlessly, as expected, gliding closer in perfect formation. Varian, meanwhile, was subtly guiding Kane toward one of the larger floating platforms, one that was slowly drifting toward a gravitational anomaly. The platform began to shudder as the gravity around it fluctuated, and Kane could feel the pull starting to increase. "Now!" Varian shouted. Kane made his move, firing a concentrated blast at the ground beneath the Xantharians, causing the platform they stood on to destabilize. At the same time, the gravity shifted violently, pulling everything toward the center of the anomaly. The Xantharians faltered for the first time, their coordination breaking as they were pulled in different directions by the sudden shift in gravity. Seizing the moment, Kane launched himself toward the nearest Xantharian, his mechanical arm glowing with energy as he delivered a devastating punch to the alien's midsection. The blow connected with a satisfying crunch, and the Xantharian was thrown backward, slamming into a floating boulder with a telekinetic scream. The remaining two Xantharians tried to regroup, but their telepathic link had been disrupted. They moved clumsily, no longer the perfectly synchronized unit they had been. Varian, now fully in control of the battlefield, used his hoverchair to manipulate the floating debris, sending chunks of metal and stone crashing into their paths, forcing them to dodge and weave. "They're vulnerable," Varian called out, his voice filled with a confidence Kane hadn't heard before. Kane pressed the advantage. With their telepathic coordination broken, the Xantharians were no match for the combination of Kane's brute force and Varian's tactical brilliance. The second Xantharian fell with a blast from Kane's pulse pistol, and the third, disoriented and off balance, was struck by a piece of debris that Varian had flung with precision. The arena fell silent as the final Xantharian crumpled to the ground, defeated. Kane stood still for a moment, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes scanned the battlefield, looking for any remaining threats, but it was over. They had won. The crowd erupted in cheers, a deafening roar of approval that shook the floating platforms. Holographic screens lit up across the arena, displaying the faces of Kane and Varian, the unexpected champions of the Galactic tournament. Kane glanced at Varian, who hovered beside him, his small form glowing softly in the dim light of the arena. The boy's expression was a mix of disbelief and pride, his eyes wide as he took in the reality of their victory. We did it," Varian whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the crowd. Kane placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his scarred face breaking into a rare smile. "You did it, kid. You were the brains behind this whole thing." Varian looked up at him, his amber eyes shining with a new sense of confidence. "No. We did it. Together." Kane chuckled softly, nodding. He had come to the tournament seeking one last challenge, a way to prove to himself that he still had a place in this galaxy. But in helping Varian, he had found something far more important: a sense of purpose beyond the battlefield, and the satisfaction of seeing someone else rise above the limitations placed on them. As the victory lights flashed across the arena and the crowd continued to cheer, Kane and Varian stood side by side, two unlikely warriors who had changed the course of the tournament and perhaps the galaxy itself. They had shown that strength wasn't just about power or brute force. It was about resilience, strategy, and the will to survive. For Varian, it was the beginning of a new life, no longer defined by the weakness his clan had seen in him. For Kane, it was a reminder that even in the vast, unforgiving universe, there was always room for redemption. Together, they had proven that sometimes, the greatest battles are fought and won not with strength, but with heart. And the galaxy would never forget their names.